The devil knows how to use our pride to lure us into spiritual traps. And pride is the most blinding thing. That's why it's especially dangerous. Of all the sins, that's the one that can harden the heart the most and make us the most spiritually blind. We often talk about sexual immorality being the worst kind of sin, and I agree with that to an extent. But if a person remains humble, they can still find a place for repentance of that sin. But pride is what keeps us from repentance, and it makes us wise and righteous in our own eyes. It's like the Pharisee in Luke 18, who thought of himself as morally superior to others. On paper, he probably was morally superior to the tax collector. But Christ said that between the two, the tax collector was the one who went home justified before God, because he was repentant and humble, while the Pharisee was blinded by his pride and a sense of self-righteousness. The prophet Obadiah spoke about the dangers of pride too. He says this to the Edomites in verse 3, "The pride of your heart has deceived you, you who live in the clefts of the rock, in your lofty dwelling, who say in your heart, who will bring me down to the ground?" I got to say, this sounds very much like the leaders of the Great Awakening and the postmillennialists who proudly declare that they will not allow their land to be taken over by the heathens and the pagans. Who's going to bring me, one of God's elect, down to the ground? They're so confident that they're in a strong position, both physically and spiritually. But they mistakenly interpret their strong physical position as a strong spiritual position too. The Edomites were only in a strong physical position, but not spiritually. The Apostle Paul was hardly ever in a strong physical position. He was imprisoned, beaten, mistreated, shipwrecked, and all the rest. But he was in a strong spiritual position because he finished the race. He kept the faith. And as he warns in 1 Corinthians 10:12, let anyone who thinks that he stands take heed lest he fall. And unfortunately, there are many professing Christians who think that they're standing strong, but will fall when tribulation and persecution come. So just like Joshua pretended to be beaten before the Canaanites to lure them into a trap, could Satan have picked up this strategy and is now using not only an obvious threat, but is also pretending to be beaten through an embarrassingly weak Biden administration and these false promises of a coming downfall of Jezebel and false eschatology like postmillennialism that gives a false hope of a coming victory and great awakening, which is really all false prophecy, to draw Christians out into the open and lure them into a pursuit of the flesh that makes them drop their spiritual guard, leave the protection of the spiritual city, and pridefully charge into a spiritual trap? I would say yes. And that this has been the devil's strategy for a long time now, with all of this exposure of the New World Order Great Reset agenda, of which this LGBT and wokeness stuff is merely a part. And I think Christians are a bit too preoccupied with exposing Disney and Hollywood and Marvel and the woke agenda and the satanic music industry, and aren't warning the church about the dangerous movement that's rising up to oppose all these things. Nothing gives a good boost to the self-righteous ego like spending time talking about how wicked Disney or Hollywood is. If you spend enough time looking into that stuff, you're going to start to feel not so evil, kind of like the Pharisee in Luke 18, who thought he was righteous because he wasn't as bad as those people, right? And we need to keep in mind that when the beast rises, he's going to be making war against something. And it's not just the saints. He's also going to go to war against Babylon. And I think that's what Christians are ultimately participating in exposing when they expose things like the gay or LGBT or Great Reset agenda without realizing what they're exposing. They think they're exposing the coming beast kingdom when really they're exposing the harlot, the enemy that the beast will destroy. Again, that's why the Seven Mountain Mandate teachers always talk about invading Babylon, because what they're building is not Christ's kingdom, but a counterfeit kingdom that will invade and eventually destroy Babylon under the pretense, the spiritual delusion, that God's kingdom has finally come and destroyed the evil satanic kingdom. And that's why they're going to cry peace and safety near the end of the tribulation after the harlot is destroyed, because they will think that Satan's kingdom has finally been destroyed and the millennial kingdom is about to start. And that's when they're going to be in for a rude awakening when Christ appears on the clouds. So this rebellion against Babylon is growing. And we're already seeing a prelude to the coming global unity against the Babylonian system, which the Great Reset and woke stuff would be a manifestation of. Okay, this is all part of the buildup to the rise of the beast. And speaking of Jack Hibbs, he was part of a special back in February on TBN, which is Trinity Broadcasting Network, which is chock full of false teachers, called Identity and Gender, hosted by Charlie Kirk. And it was about the spread of LGBT and critical race theory and all these leftist things. John MacArthur joined in as well, who's also been on a very dangerous trajectory the past couple years. And we'll be looking at some footage from this special in just a bit. But MacArthur's participation in this is another example of the growing unity between the NAR and Reform camps against the woke secularist culture. This is what always happens, is ecumenicism in the name of fighting against secularism. And we're seeing the same thing today on a very large scale in America and around the world. So don't be fooled by the American gospel films. I know they have some truth in them, but Reformed teachers are more than willing to lock arms with heretics if it means saving the country. And Vodi Bakum is another example. Jeff Durbin too. And there are many, many others. But I think Christians who act like this LGBT stuff is just going to take over the world and it's going to be part of the beast system are not being very discerning and could possibly be falling for the false light trap. Because this LGBT woke movement is clearly made up of people who are incredibly mentally weak and even mentally ill in many cases. The false light, great awakening, red pill side, by comparison, is very powerful. It has much more logic and facts and mental stability on its side. That's why the delusion is going to get so strong, because the people swept up in this movement think that they're on the side of God fighting against the evil satanic kingdom. But here's something interesting. It says in Revelation 18:2 that Babylon the harlot has become a dwelling place for demons. In other words, the beast kingdom is going to make war against a demonic system and a satanic stronghold on the earth. And that's when the saints will be lumped in with that demonic system and be called Beelzebub, as Christ warned about in Matthew chapter 10, where he's warning his disciples about the coming persecution, which is a picture of the persecution that the saints will face during the tribulation. If you look at Matthew 10:16 through 25, you're going to notice a lot of the same language that Christ uses in Matthew 24, where he talks about the tribulation period. So the saints are going to be lumped in with the quote-unquote demonic system of the harlot because we won't take the mark of the beast and will therefore be accused of being part of that demonic system and will be called Beelzebub just like Christ was by the Pharisees. And the culmination of the beast war will be the destruction of a demonic city. This is why I've been saying for years that Gnosticism is rising up to fight Satanism. Gnosticism is fighting against the obvious Anton LaVey Church of Satanism type stuff. And the New Age especially has a very naive view of what demons are. They think demons are these overly dark, scary-looking things that release negative energy and plot global domination, like the depiction of Emperor Zurg from the Lightyear film with the glowing red eyes and horns, or like the demons in the Doom video game series. That's how the world views demons. And so it's concerning when Christians who should understand that Satan disguises himself as an angel of light are so hyper-focused on exposing the obvious black magic, inverted pentagram Satanism and sort of fall into a New Age view of spiritual warfare where it just becomes about fighting against the dark satanic agenda and only painting the left, Jezebel, Great Reset side as quote unquote the demonic side.